A German officer whispered that today his wife will become a widow, but she does not know it yet. He was standing aboard the battleship Bismarck on the morning of May 27, 1941. Her rudder was jammed. She could not steer. She was circling helplessly in the North Atlantic, and every man aboard knew the British fleet was coming to kill them. When the senior surviving officer, Baron von Mullenheim-Rechberg, raised his rangefinder and spotted two battleships closing from the west, he described what he saw in 6 words that belong in a horror film: as imperturbable as though they were on their way to an execution. The ship leading that execution was HMS Rodney. And what makes this story impossible to believe is what Rodney actually was. 3 days earlier, she had been heading to a shipyard in Boston for emergency repairs. Her engines were failing. Her boilers leaked so badly that the smallest crew member had to be wrapped in wet rags and shoved inside the boiler drums to plug the holes while they were still hot. She was carrying 4,000 replacement boiler tubes as cargo because her own were disintegrating. Her hull flexed in heavy seas. Her rudder had failed repeatedly. She was, by every measure, a ship on her way to the scrapyard. And in the next 90 minutes, this broken-down, 16-year-old battleship would fire 378 16-inch shells into Bismarck from so close that her crew could watch them hit. She would likely become the only battleship in history to torpedo another battleship. And she would reduce the pride of Hitler's navy to a burning, gutted wreck that slipped beneath the Atlantic with over 2,000 men still inside. But to understand how a ship that could barely keep herself afloat ended up delivering the most devastating bombardment of the entire war, you need to know what happened 3 days earlier, and why the entire Royal Navy was willing to burn itself out to avenge it. On May 24, 1941, the German battleship Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen were intercepted in the Denmark Strait by HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales. Hood was the pride of the Royal Navy, the largest warship in the world for 20 years, the ship the British public loved more than any other. At 6 minutes past 6 in the morning, a shell from Bismarck's 5th salvo struck near Hood's aft magazines. The detonation broke the ship in half. Hood sank in under 3 minutes. 1,415 men were killed. 3 survived. 3 men out of a crew of over 1,400. The shock that went through the Royal Navy that morning cannot be overstated. Churchill personally intervened. The Admiralty issued a single order that would define the next 72 hours. Bismarck must be sunk at all costs. The Navy committed 6 battleships, 3 battlecruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 16 cruisers, and 33 destroyers to the hunt. But Bismarck had drawn first blood, and she was running for the French coast. Prince of Wales, despite suffering gun turret malfunctions, had scored 3 hits on Bismarck that would prove decisive. One ruptured forward fuel tanks, leaking 1,000 tons of oil and leaving a visible slick. Another flooded a generator room and caused a 9-degree list. These hits forced the German Admiral Lütjens to abandon his commerce raiding mission and make for France. But if Bismarck reached the Bay of Biscay, she would be under Luftwaffe air cover and beyond the reach of the British fleet. The Royal Navy had days at most, and the one ship with the firepower to guarantee the kill was a mechanical wreck heading in the wrong direction. HMS Rodney carried 9 16-inch guns, the heaviest afloat in any European navy. All 9 were mounted forward of the bridge in 3 triple turrets, an arrangement so unusual that no other British battleship ever repeated it. Her broadside weighed over 8,000 kilograms, 30% heavier than Bismarck's. She also carried something no other battleship in the world still had: underwater torpedo tubes. On paper, she was the most heavily armed battleship in Europe, but in practice, she was falling apart. Rodney had been commissioned in December of 1927. By May of 1941, she had not received any significant mechanical repairs for 3 years. Her boilers leaked constantly. Crew members passed out from heat exhaustion in the engine rooms. Her hull plating flexed and leaked in heavy weather, overwhelming the pumps. Her rudder had failed in November of 1939, again in February of 1940, and continued to give trouble. Her designed speed was 23 knots, but she could barely sustain 21. On May 22nd, she sailed from Greenock, escorting the liner Britannic bound for Halifax. She was carrying 521 military passengers, gold bullion from the Bank of England, an American naval attaché with classified documents, and reportedly crates of the Elgin marbles. Her destination after Halifax was the Boston Navy Yard for a complete overhaul. She was not expected to fight anything on the way there. What made Rodney's survival to this point almost absurd was that she should have been dead already. In October of 1939, a German submarine fired 2 torpedoes into her hull. Neither exploded. The crew did not even know they had been hit. In April of 1940, during the Norway campaign, a 500-kilogram German bomb pierced her armored deck and landed inside the ship. It did not go off. Rodney was a ship that existed purely because her enemy's weapons kept failing to work. Then Hood blew up, and everything changed. On the morning of May 24th, the Admiralty ordered Rodney to join the hunt. Her captain, Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton, left the liner Britannic with a destroyer escort and turned toward the last known position of Bismarck, 800 miles to the north. The pursuit nearly failed before it started. Rodney's worn engines consumed fuel at a terrifying rate. She was making 22 knots, which was close to her absolute limit with leaking boilers and failing machinery. But every hour at that speed risked a catastrophic breakdown that would leave her dead in the water. Churchill himself sent a signal so extreme that the First Sea Lord later apologized for it. Bismarck must be sunk at all costs, and if necessary, King George V must remain on the scene, even if it subsequently means towing her home. Then came the moment that almost lost Bismarck entirely. On May 25th, the heavy cruiser Suffolk lost radar contact. Bismarck had vanished. Admiral Tovey, aboard King George V, ordered all ships to head northwest, believing Bismarck was returning toward Norway. The order was based on a critical plotting error, using the wrong type of chart. Dalrymple Hamilton looked at the chart, consulted his navigator and the American attaché aboard, and made a decision that should have ended his career. He ignored the order. He believed Bismarck was heading for the French coast, not Norway. So he held his southeastern course, while every other capital ship in the fleet turned the wrong way. During those hours, Bismarck actually passed within 25 nautical miles of Rodney, just beyond the horizon. If Dalrymple Hamilton had obeyed Tovey, the interception would never have happened. He was vindicated within hours when the Admiralty confirmed his instinct. Bismarck was heading for Brest. On the evening of May 26th, 15 Swordfish torpedo bombers launched from the aircraft carrier Ark Royal. They were fabric-covered biplanes with a top speed of barely 140 miles per hour, flying into a Force 8 gale against the most advanced battleship in the German fleet. 2 torpedoes hit. One struck amidships and did almost nothing, but the second struck the stern and jammed Bismarck's twin rudders at 12 degrees to port. Every attempt to repair them failed. The rudder compartments were flooded. Divers could not work in the heavy seas. Differential propeller steering was tried and abandoned. Bismarck was now locked into a slow, uncontrollable turn, heading northwest, directly back toward the British battleships she had been trying to outrun. Admiral Lütjens sent his final signal to Berlin. Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer. Aboard Bismarck, the crew understood what those words meant. As one account records, at that point, the crew knew that both Raeder and Hitler already considered them dead. The ship that had destroyed Hood 3 days earlier was now waiting to die. and the executioner approaching from the west was a broken-down battleship that should have been in a repair dock in Massachusetts. If you are finding this story as gripping as the men who lived it found it terrifying, hit subscribe. This channel covers the forgotten turning points of military history every week. Because what happened the next morning was one of the most brutal 90 minutes in naval history. At 8:47 on the morning of May 27th, Rodney opened fire first. 6 16-inch guns fired at a range of 23,400 yards. King George V followed 1 minute later. Bismarck returned fire at 8:49. Her second salvo straddled Rodney, shells landing just 200 yards astern. It was the closest Bismarck would come to hitting any British ship in the entire battle. At 9:02, Rodney landed a salvo that decided everything. At least one 16-inch shell struck the base of turret Bruno, blowing the 12.5-inch rear armor plate clean off. Another tore through the bridge area, almost certainly killing Admiral Lutyens, Captain Lindemann, and the entire bridge staff in a single moment. The forward fire control director was destroyed. By 9:08, both forward turrets were confirmed out of action. Fire control shifted to Mullenheim-Rechberg in the aft director. Under his command, the aft turrets straddled King George V on their fourth salvo, but at 9:13, a 14-inch shell destroyed his cupola. He felt the compartment shudder, and when he tried to look through the rangefinder, all he could see was blue. The lenses had shattered. Turrets continued firing under local control, but without centralized direction, their accuracy collapsed. By 9:31, every one of Bismarck's 4 main turrets was silent. She had been the most feared warship in the Atlantic. Now, she could not fire a single gun. And then, Dalrymple Hamilton did something that no battleship captain was supposed to do. He closed the range. Rodney drove straight at Bismarck until the range was down to 3,000 yards, less than 2 miles. At that distance, her spotters could follow the shells visually all the way to impact. She was firing full 9-gun broadsides on a flat trajectory, zigzagging and firing from alternate sides. Her 6-inch secondary battery opened up at the same time, and at that range, virtually every shell hit. Royal Marine Len Nicole, in one of Rodney's 6-inch turrets, later said he watched the back of Bismarck's B turret explode and flip into the air, spinning like a coin. Then, Rodney did something that had never been done before and has never been done since. She fired torpedoes at Bismarck from her underwater tubes. At least one is believed to have hit. If confirmed, it makes Rodney the only battleship in history to have torpedoed another battleship. In 90 minutes of firing, Rodney put 378 16-inch shells and 706 6-inch shells into Bismarck. Estimates suggest over 100 16-inch rounds struck home. Garsky and Doolin, the leading naval architects who analyzed the battle, concluded that Rodney did most of the serious damage to Bismarck. And the ship that delivered this, the most concentrated bombardment of any surface action in the war, had been heading to the scrapyard 3 days earlier. Aboard Bismarck, the bombardment was beyond anything the crew had imagined. Joseph Stotts, a damage control officer, stared at his damage board and watched red, the color for flooding, spread across the entire port side of the ship. Wounded men crawled through passageways filled with smoke and the screams of the dying. Above decks, every gun, searchlight, and ladder had been blown away. Shell holes in the deck opened directly onto fires burning below. Mullenheim-Rechberg, the senior surviving officer, eventually made it to the upper deck. He described the scene as something out of Dante's Inferno. Turret Caesar's guns were jammed at maximum elevation, pointed uselessly at the sky. The ship was listing 20 degrees to port and settling by the stern. At 10:16, Rodney ceased fire and turned away, critically short of fuel. Bismarck was still afloat, but she was a gutted, burning wreck. The heavy cruiser Dorsetshire closed and fired 3 torpedoes. 2 hit. At approximately 10:39, Bismarck rolled over and sank stern first into the Atlantic. Of her crew of approximately 2,200, 115 survivors. Rescue was cut short when a British destroyer spotted what appeared to be a submarine periscope. Hundreds of German sailors were left in the water. A British seaman aboard Dorsetshire told an oil-soaked German officer as he hauled him aboard, "You today, us tomorrow." Rodney limped back to Greenock on May 29th, battered and nearly out of fuel, but the damage from her own guns was worse than anything Bismarck had done to her. Deck plates around the turrets had been crushed by muzzle blast, structural members cracked, piping, water mains, and virtually every light bulb in the forward section had been destroyed. One gun in A turret was permanently broken. As one account noted, Rodney's own main guns firing at low elevation had damaged her more extensively than Bismarck had. She had won the fight and nearly destroyed herself in the process, but she continued to Boston for her long-overdue refit, then returned to the war. She supported the invasions of North Africa, Sicily, and Salerno. At Normandy in June of 1944, her 16-inch guns struck targets 17 miles inland, destroying approximately 50 German tanks massing for a counterattack. A captured German officer's statement summarized the enemy's view. "We will fight you. We will fight your tanks. But those naval guns are too much." Rodney steamed over 156,000 nautical miles during the war, with no major engine overhaul after 1942. By the end, she could barely move under her own power. She was scrapped at Inverkeithing, Scotland, starting in March of 1948. Dalrymple Hamilton, the captain who disobeyed orders and closed to point-blank range, was promoted to Rear Admiral 6 weeks after the battle. His son had served as a gun director aboard King George V during the same engagement. Father and son had destroyed Bismarck from different ships. Bismarck had been commissioned less than a year before she sank. She was the pride of Hitler's navy, the most modern capital ship in the German fleet. The ship that destroyed her had been launched in 1925, was held together by temporary repairs, and had been carrying her own replacement parts as cargo. 9 16-inch guns, 378 shells, 90 minutes from the range of an execution squad, and one torpedo that, if the historians are right, made Rodney the only battleship in history to torpedo another battleship.